All right, well, we'll get started here. Thanks to everybody for coming tonight to this discussion about whether or not Calgary should pursue the Olympics again, this time in 2026. I want to tell you a bit about our speakers tonight, and also a bit about the format, and also a thing or two about Communities First Society. So let's just start with the format. So we'll hear from the pro side first, because I think that makes sense, putting it on the table, why it is we should be supportive of it. And then we will hear from the anti side about why it is we should not be supportive this time around. I don't know how many of you have already come with your minds made up. I will tell you my personal position. I started out gung-ho in favor, because in 1988 my school, Bishop Carroll, was the home of Heidi and Howdy. So we had a whole lot of excitement about the Olympics in my day, and everyone I know who was involved in it has nothing but a positive memory of it. The reason I went on the anti-side is when I saw the proposal and they came out proposing that there would be a $400 million operating deficit. And that just seemed to be out of sync with not only the legacy of the '88 Olympics, but also I think with where Calgarians are at right now. The other thing too, you think that we're 2017, we've had guys who've been out of work in some cases as long as 2 years, and that's a hard pill to swallow, spending that kind of money. On the other hand, the whole world can change by 2026, and it may be exactly the thing that we need at that time. I see that Councilmember Sean Chu is here. I was very supportive of his proposal to put it to the people to decide in a referendum, but it is going to get kicked back to council. Council will have to decide. I think this is a more of a neutral kind of way for us to have this discussion, where you don't have politicians up here trying to win or lose votes on the basis of this one decision, because there's lots of decisions that they have to make on council. But hopefully at the end of this, you'll be persuaded one way or the other. So we'll hear from our two speakers. Then we will do audience questions. If you don't have any, I am sure that I will have a lot of questions, and then we'll see whether or not there's one side that wins. Keep in mind, I will probably do a vote at the end to see which direction you guys are all going. So first, Communities First is a nonprofit Alberta registered society. Its mission is to advocate on behalf of communities. And since its establishment in 2013, it has supported 6 community issues. Some of the communities involved were Shawnee Slopes, McCall Lake, Glendale, University Heights, Hillcrest Viewpoint, and Pascagoula Slopes. This is a little bit different because this is an issue that affects everyone. So Frank King, I don't even know if he needs an introduction. I think everybody knows his name is synonymous with the 1988 Olympics. He's best known as the chairman and CEO of the best ever Olympic Winter Games, the 25th Olympic Winter Games in Calgary. As chairman of the Calgary Olympic Development Association, he was instrumental in preparing the winning bid to host the 1988 Olympic Winter Games for Calgary. Following the successful bid, Frank also became the chairman and CEO of the Calgary Olympic Organizing Committee. Long list of honors here. The Olympic Order in Gold, the highest award presented by the International Olympic Committee. He's an officer of the Order of Canada. He's national co-chair of Canada 125, the celebration of Canada's 125th birthday, Alberta Centennial Salute for Sport and Recreation, Canadian Olympic Hall of Fame, and Western Legacy Award for 100 outstanding Albertans. So please welcome Frank King. And let me tell you a bit about Tom Singlinger. Tom is an international economic analyst. He successfully completed 18 international projects in 12 countries for both private and public entities, such as the Canadian International Development Agency in Panama, the Congressional National Democratic Institute, Washington, Petroleum Institute of Thailand in Bangkok, President Carter Center, Atlanta, Canadian Executive Service Organization, Siberia. He served in the Alberta Legislative Assembly. He was a select committee member for the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. The Alberta and Lethbridge Sports Hall of Fame inducted him in recognition of his Alberta and Canadian basketball championships. He's a founding director in 2013 of Communities First Society, which, as I mentioned, advocates on behalf of communities. I love this one. On his 50th birthday, he ran 50 kilometers, and he's now training to run 100 kilometers on his 100th birthday. So welcome here and give him some support and effort. All right, so just to be able to get the arguments on the table, we'll give Frank as much as you need. I mean, if you can do it quickly, we'll do it quickly. If you need a little bit more time, we'll do a bit more time. We had initially thought it would be a bit more of a formal discussion, but so each of the proponent and the opponent will have about 10 minutes, and then we'll give them a chance to respond to each other and get questions from you. But let's start with Frank King.
Well, thank you, and I'm really impressed with my competitor here because he can run further and faster than I can, and running used to be my sport, so I'm a little worried about how this is going to go. But let me start this way. The Olympic movement is a worldwide movement, and it's generally circled around sports of all kinds. There's practically no sport that you could name that they are not interested in and will be part of one games or another. So anyone who likes the idea that our society needs some sport goods in there, not the goods, but the people who are playing them and whatnot, is this a good thing for our community or not? Do we want to expand and make it worthwhile or not? For me, you could guess that I would say the more the better, because when young people are growing up, it's one of the ways that you can get them to have fun while learning how to follow instructions or things like that, because games are like that. In hockey, you can't skate across that line and not be offside. You know, that kind of thing is good for children. At least it is where I come from. And so if you have a feeling that society benefits from sports, starting with children, then you are eligible to like what the Olympics are here for, because the Olympics start to set the goals higher and higher for those young people that you've got under your care. And so they have events every year which do the ultimate, and that is the best ones in the whole world, not just your son or daughter, or the best one in Calgary or Canada. These are the best in the world. And I don't know of any other society that does the job that the Olympic movement does. Frankly, when I got to know the Olympic movement when we were making our bid, and Canada had made 3 bids and lost the 3. And it bothered me. I'm an engineer, and you like to have some kind of scientific, how could we lose so many times? And so we went over and talked to the president. And to make a long story short, I don't mind telling you that from that day on until the day he left us from Canada for the last time, he was very interested in the kinds of approach that I was suggesting we should take to make the Olympic Games better. And so we changed a whole bunch of things within the Olympic movement because of Calgary's input. I'm going to say Calgary, and it sounds like it was just me. It was a lot more than me, but I was the chairman, and so I was the guy that could get the open door better than anyone else, because he didn't have time to have 12 guys to come and see him. We looked at the games that were being held, and we criticized them together, and I said, gee, why do you do that? There was even a senior person in the IOC that I found out was taking money from the IOC, and I told him, and he said, you got to be kidding. And I said, no, just ask him, and they'll tell you. And he fired her the next day. These are the kinds of things that we became friends and partners, rather than a big boss and I got to try to feed him some information. We were partners. We were providers, and he was a user. And if we had a problem, we could take it to him, and he would take it. He said, I'll take a look at that. And so, by the way, he's no longer with us. So the new one I do not know as well, and I don't. So I can't say that he would be the very same as mine. And I'll save you that that question, because if the new one that's here, I would say this, that the International Olympic Committee is at least triple the size now that it was when we first met them. Part of it was because of Calgary. I don't mind taking credit for it on behalf of all the Calgarians that stepped out, because we showed them better ways of organizing these games. It had nothing to do with how fast can you run or throw or whatever else. It was how do you organize these things so that communities can afford them, and the country will benefit from them, because anyone with children could take a look at these things and they might say, oh, would I ever like to do that, as young people tend to do. And so the other thing that has been preserved, which is very important, I think, is that it's one of the things, it's the only one that I know of, that you can be involved with. Anyone in this room could be involved with this. And it's the best in the world. And you'd say, well, why? Is your mind so weak that you need to have to be the best in the world at something? And I said, no, it isn't like that. It is that for children coming along, thinking bigger than just doing something out on the road, is that the best you can do? Or should we be able to do this? Well, there's a school, we're going to do that. And then there is your city and your country who will take you abroad to see if you can run with the best in the world. If they didn't exist, and I was telling you, I've got this new idea and this is what we're going to do, you'd go out of there and saying, who is this idiot? You know, nobody's ever going to be able to do that. Well, this is now getting into many late years where the Olympic movement has been, and they've been getting better, and there are more and more opportunities for anybody, say in Calgary, in Alberta, or Canada. If we were to bring the games here again, it would be a major contribution to opening their eyes to these kinds of things. And so I'll stop talking, but I would just say this, that the Olympic movement is unique in its ability to get the whole world to come to do something. If you can think of somebody else that's doing that, I'd like to know who it is.
Thanks for that. Okay, so that was the pro. And now Tom Singlinger with the...
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you for being here tonight with us, everybody. The most significant event in Calgary's history since its incorporation in 1885 to today in 2017 has been the 88 Calgary Winter Olympics. There has been nothing that has the impact and the inspiration for the citizens of this city as the successful Olympics in '88. And for that, we have to thank Mr. King a great deal. Thank you very much, sir. Now, I remember the days when we were first started talking about the Olympics. I was in the legislature at that time, and the byword all the time was money. We had nothing but money. We had so much money, we had to set up a bucket to hold it. Pierre Trudeau was the guy that came up with the idea of the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund to put our surplus money in there. Our annual budget at that time was about $6 or $8 billion. We had a surplus at the same time of about $10 or $12 billion. The surplus was twice the amount of money that our budget was. So they put that surplus in the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund. But that bucket that we call the Heritage Savings Trust Fund wasn't enough to hold all the extra money. So they set up another bucket, the General Revenue Fund. The problem we had then was, what do we do with all this money? And every legislator had an idea. Build a playground here, every city should have a hospital, every small town a hockey rink. It didn't matter where you went, the issue was, what should we do with all this money? And that was the background for the Olympic Games then. And when somebody started talking about Olympic Games, it wasn't a question of how much it would cost. The discussion resolved around what a good idea was, what the principles were, how it brought together the world, how it came to bring us all together. And so when somebody said, Premier Locke, in this instance, let's have the Olympic Games, nobody was reserved and said, well, do you have money or how are we going to handle this? It just said, let's do it, and we did it. That was then. The question then was not money. But today in 2017, we live in a different world. We don't have the surplus we had then. We have a deficit. There isn't a government in this country that doesn't have a deficit and a debt. And I'll talk about the ones I know. The provincial government today is having annual deficits around $10 or $12 billion a year. Now, I don't know how much money that is. I don't know what $1 billion is. But what I do know is what I have in my hand right here. It's a $20 bill. And if I took this $20 bill and put it on the floor and stood on it, and then if I got everybody in the city to come up here and put down a $20 bill, that stack of $20 bills wouldn't even come up to the top of the sole of my shoes. That's how much these $1 billion are that we're talking about. Now, Calgary is in a situation where they cannot talk about luxury items. And inspiring and as beneficial as the Olympics may be for the city, there is no money. In Alberta, we have something called the Municipal Government Act. And it sets the debt limit that a municipality can incur. In Calgary, we already have a $3.2 billion debt. And Danielle, I see you with your pen over there, a piece of paper. I'll ask you as I go along to add these numbers up. 3.2 billion is our starting point. That's our debt for the city of Calgary. The city of Calgary has also underwritten the debt for NMAX, which is another $1.2 billion. We have committed $1.5 billion for the Crowchild expansion. We have also committed $1.5 billion for the LRT Green Line. And on top of that, we still have an unfunded pension debt for the police and firemen, which is peanuts, really. It's only $200 million compared to these billions I'm talking about. But it's got to be one of our foremost priorities before we can talk about the Olympics and hockey, for example. Now, on top of those numbers, Danielle, the next number to add is an estimate for the Olympic Games. Now, estimates for anything, private or public, are notorious for not being very close to the mark. But the estimate for the Olympic Games, for our share alone, Calgary's share, is about $2.4 billion. Now, that's a lot of billions, Daniel. How many you got there?
Pretty close to 10.
Pretty close to $10 billion. Well, the Alberta Government Municipal Act for debt sets the ceiling for Alberta debt at about $6.2 or $3 billion. $6.23 billion. Now, I love the idea of the Olympics. I have great experience from the Olympics we had here in '88. Good memories of my family, my friends. But it's a different era now. We do not have the money we had then. We're looking at a deficit in every government we're talking about in this country. And we have already exceeded the limits set by the Municipal Government Act. Danielle tells me that's about $10 billion right now. The limit set by that act for Calgary is about $6.2 billion. We have exceeded that limit by about 50%, or we will exceed that limit, handling that debt. Now, I've just been talking about debt. Now, any of you have a mortgage or payments for a car will realize that most of your payments go to interest. It's not to retire the debt. So if we've got a $10 billion debt here, the interest on that debt at 5% over 30 years is about $8 billion. So we have a debt of $10 billion plus interest of $8 billion, that's $18 billion bucks. Now, what is 18 billion bucks? I don't know. I know I've got 20 billion, or $20 here under my foot. $18 billion for each one of you people sitting out here is about $25,000. $25 for each one of you. If you want to put that on a household basis, there are about 500,000 households in the city. That's about $35,000 per household. I love the Olympics. I would like to have a do-over with Mr. King again at the head of it. Unfortunately, we do not have the money. And that's all there is to it. Thank you, Danielle.
Thanks, Tom. Now, Frank, did you want to respond to anything that Tom said, or should I just ask specific questions to each of you?
Well, I would like to just make a small, because it sounds like there's one guy that really wants to do it, another guy wants to do it, but hasn't got the money. The one thing I could say about the Olympic Games is they will bring money, not spend money, net. You would have to have some time to go through this, but the kind of money that is raised through television around the world for these things is in the millions of dollars, and you have to know how to do it, how to get at it, and so on. But this is one of the problems I used to have with the city of Calgary, because the mayor used to keep slapping me around saying, "Come on, no, we're not going to do that." And I said, "Yes, we are, Mr. Mayor." And he said, "Well, who the hell are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm the chairman of the organizing committee." And I said, "Who the hell are you?" And I said, we're not needing to spend money for you. This is going to bring money. But you have to have the city doesn't sign, there's nothing to talk about. The city has to approve this. But they need to see what the economics just of this event is. I'm not saying that we're going to solve all the big problems that the city has. That's beyond. But if you were to say, we're having these games and that's just going to cost us more money, I would say no. And we can prove that very, very easily, that these games bring money to the society here. So that's what I wouldn't be sitting here at all. And by the way, I'm very concerned in the same way that our good friend here is. It isn't like we got a whole bunch of money, let's go have a party and run a few races. It's a very, very positive thing. The television rights that came from these games were in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And the IOC was in big debt when we met them. By the time we were finished, they were following the things that we were suggesting. And they had paid off all the debt and we're doing more for it. So I'm concerned about our debt here, and I would say we should take a careful look, hands in hands, to see if we couldn't. I don't, by the way, don't folks say that Frank said we could pay off all our debts because if we had the Olympics. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying we could pay off some of our debts. And you shouldn't rely on the Olympics to get us back into a zero position. That's not what I'm saying, but I don't want you to be worried that the games would cause a worse balance sheet.
Can you comment on the revenue side and whether or not we would get a net benefit?
I sure can, thank you. The economics of the Olympic Games have become a major topic of discussion over the last 20 years. And there is a most recent study from Oxford University dealing with the cost and benefits of the Olympics. And the conclusion of that study, which is pretty well concurred in by most economists that I have read, is that the Olympic Games are always consistently, they use the word consistently, the benefits of the Olympics are consistently exaggerated and the costs are consistently underestimated. An example of this is the Vancouver Olympic game. And we can never pin down the cost exactly, but when that Olympic game was being promoted by Vancouver, the mayor was saying the economic benefits would be somewhere around $10 billion. Well, that was good to get public support for the bid, but after the bid was received and development went along, the estimate of the economic benefits suddenly dropped from 10 billion down to maybe 2 or 4. Now, in regard to the costs were estimated at around 2 billion. And when it was all over, they actually turned out to be around 8 to 10 billion, somewhere in there. The point of all this is that you cannot really say that this is going to be beneficial for the city, nor that the costs are going to be these.
Okay, so let's get into a few things. Let me ask you the uncomfortable question, Frank, because when I talk about this on the air, one of the biggest issues is the taint of the IOC, the perception. You relate a story about somebody taking money. There's this perception that everybody there is on the take. They are putting unreasonable expectations on the city that is the host city. They live very large when they're here. And people are just saying, until the IOC cleans up its act, why should we be in business with them? Can you comment on that?
Well, I've been associated with that group for about 20 years, and I didn't see anything even close to that. Somebody has just got, maybe there's one thing that happened to them, and some guy in the Olympic movement promised something and didn't deliver. But what he's saying is wrong. The Olympic movement is the money that's there is published, and you can look it up and get it. It's a very broadly discussed. Now let me tell you some of the reasons that there are problems, and that is people tend to exaggerate or blame or don't follow the exact truth. The Olympic Games, when I first knew them, had never for themselves had an account worth anything more than a few $100 million or something, just for their own. They've gone up into the billions now, and what's happened is they're running the games to the benefit of the providers, and so the world is standing up even more. Now, you did a whole bunch of people, including Vancouver. They're good friends of mine, but they built great big buildings to put people in. We didn't do that. We asked the university to shut down for 2 weeks so that we could put the athletes in the university residences. We had a wonderful thing, and we said, we'll build a thing here and it's going to cost a few $1 million, and we'll give it to you at the end. That's the speed skating oval that's there, if you've been up there. But so we made deals with people. We didn't need a speed skating oval all over the place, but this is now, there have been 320 world records set in the Calgary speed skating oval. And this is the kind of thing, it isn't, you can't just say, we're going to lose more money. I would say, if you do it right, you make more money.
Tom, where does this perception come from? Because I have to tell you, it is the most common thing that is raised when I talk about this, is corruption within the IOC.
It is, and we hear it quite often, but it's more like conventional wisdom that this goes on. Now, I've had a great deal of business experience internationally, and I know international people's approach to business is much different than a North American's approach to business.
Yeah, you can write off bribes in France, can't you?
Yeah.
Well, that summarizes it.
All right, let's break down the costs a little bit as well, if we can, because I think one of the issues we have is each of them have a different argument for and against. When I spoke with John Furlong, for instance, and he was talking about the games running a surplus, he said, we're talking about the operating cost of the games running a surplus. He said, the capital discussion we have is a separate discussion, and the security discussion that we have is a separate discussion as well. So let's start with the first one, because that is the one that turned me off, is when they came up with a proposal that they wouldn't even run an operating break even. They were talking about a $400 million operating deficit. Now I have to tell you, if you start off, and especially when we look at the history of decision-making of politicians, When you start off saying already planning to run a $400 million deficit, I don't think anybody anticipates that you're going to have anything other than double or triple that. So that was the big disappointment for me. And maybe you can tell me, Frank, is that just a premature initial analysis? Is it possible to get these games on the operating side running in surplus so that you can get more of the fiscal conservatives on side with it?
Well, let me first answer it by saying this. You have to look at the whole money situation this way. Money to build facilities that you need, like we were building a new facility called the Saddle Dome. That, by the way, is so old and now not up to the standard. Edmonton has built a brand new one up there, and Calgary is sort of looking at it and say, boy, I wish we could build one like that now. The only way that I could see that we could help you do that is to have the Olympics, because the Olympics get huge television rights. In fact, we helped the IOC organize the Olympics of both the summer and the winter games, so that it would always be just the very best that you could get out of television. And it is television that is the major, it isn't the number of people that come. It's important, but the television rights are the big deal. And the way that is done is by talking to the television people, which is what we did, and then we went to the IOC and said, there are a whole bunch of things that we should do because we're not getting the money because you're not listening to them. And he said, well, like what? And I said, well, first of all, we should stop having the summer games and the winter games in the same year. There is so much money that you can spend if you're a sponsor, and you could spread it out over 3 or 4 years. That would be a bigger number than if you just one big number like this. So you can't have the summer and the winter games in the same year because Coca-Cola will only sell so much in the world. And Coca-Cola, by the way, was one of those that we were talking to. And then secondly, we need to have the best sport that we have where it is here in Calgary. It would be at 6 o'clock on Sunday evening in New York, because that's when most of the women are really interested in what's going on, and they would watch that. The men would bounce all over the place to get what they want to see. So you start to put your best stuff 6 o'clock Sunday at New York time. And so we asked them to change the Olympic movement. They used to have a fewer number of days. I said, but we want the same 16 days. 16 days can have 3 Sundays in it, and that's where you get your money. So it's, I'm sorry to have to do it this way, but if I just said, well, you just manage it better. I mean, it just sounds what he did. He's just saying things, but what do you actually mean? So I'm giving you some reasons, not reasons, I'm giving you some methods of making sure that you get the most money that there is from these things. The IOC, in the last 20 years since we've really been involved with them, is now spending billions of dollars in various places where they need it on the ground in order for countries that are not as good as Canada and the United States. They can help those countries down there. I'm very proud of what they have done with the Olympic movement. It's probably, I can't think of anything more that they might come up with to make it easier, but our own problems are self-provided. Like with the problems that you have been talking about, we've done it. It's not the Olympic movement that we had a few years back. The Olympic movement, I wouldn't say for a moment that would solve this problem. That's just dumb. It's not going to happen. But it's not going to remove money from there, and it might make for at least 1 year more money coming into the system than is going out. Now the other thing is, with a 16-day event, can you build us a new hockey arena?
Hold on. I don't want to get into the capital yet, because I think the capital is a whole different
Okay.
discussion. Because the operating side, I think you made a persuasive argument on the operating side though, and I would have felt a lot better if the committee came out and said, at the moment, if we run it this way on the operating side, we would be 400 million short. The IOC would have to come to the table with additional television revenues for us, because I thought that all those went to the IOC. And there's a good argument to be made here that because America is probably the strongest, richest market being interested in these games, and we are in sync in time zones, they are going to be able to sell advertising to far more eyes. So I think we could make the argument to the IOC, we're not doing this unless you cut us in on a greater share of the TV revenues so that we can at least get to break even. So does that persuade you at all, Tom?
Well, I'm not against Olympics. Let me reiterate. I'm against paying for them. We don't have the money. We don't have the money at all. And there's a great deal of public confusion when we start talking about the details. Money for this and money for that about the Olympics. For example, the Olympic Committee that reported to Council a couple of months ago said that the city's share of the cost would be 1.2 billion. Well, I can understand that, but then they start talking about the fine print. And they say, in addition to that, we will have to build a second arena. And then they start talking about the security costs, which could be in the range of $1 billion. What I would like to know as a member of the public is how much does it cost? I don't want you to talk about operating costs or capital costs or security costs or arena costs. What are we in for? I want to know right now what I'm buying. I don't want to pick in a poke. And that's what happens when we start doing that. It's like going to the car dealer and buying a car, and you're ready to drive it off the lot, and they said, oh, would you like to have some wheels for that? And that's an additional cost. Well, fine, here's the wheels, I'll pay you for that. They said, well, if you're going to take the car, the wheels, here's the cost for the engine. I don't want to know that. I want to know what the cost of the car is. As a member of the public, I want to know what this is going to cost me. And there's so much confusion in the public's mind when you start talking about operating costs, capital costs, security costs, and whatever, all the hidden costs. Just deal with a straight number. And then maybe we can get behind this, or maybe not.
Okay, I'm going to disagree with Tom, but I'm going to let Frank make the argument. The reason I think capital costs are different is because I think it would be foolish to think that you have to make back all of the revenues on a single event, because that's not been the case of the legacy projects and infrastructure that was built in 1988. So my view is that over a long enough period of time, the revenues associated with that infrastructure more than pays it back. But I'm going to put that forward as a premise, and I'm going to see if you can make the argument.
Well, it's a good argument. I would start again and say you cannot expect to have the Olympic Games here without there being some cost to the home city, country, and province and country. However, you can have money that you spend, and then from that point on, it eliminates you having to spend any more money for a long, long time. Like we have the same ice arena now that we had for the games back 25, 30 years ago. So that's why that you have to give value to something that will last for 30 years and no major building cost. There's operating cost and all those kinds of things.
So Tom, let me put that to you.
So that's the idea that I am referring to, that the Olympic Games can get one big blow at it, and what you have is, you haven't got everything paid for. But if you want to have a new arena here, for example, this would be one of the better ways to get it. If we didn't have...
Yeah.
No, I know you're going to jump in, but let me just sort of put it to you this way. So if you have 2.4 billion in capital costs, and it ends up generating 120 million worth of revenue each and every year, year after year after year, you're going to pay back that investment after 20 years. If it lasts 30 years, you're actually ahead of the game. So dismantle that argument for me.
Show me that. Okay, show me how you do that with that Olympic Saddle Dome. Now, the Flames did not pay a penny to build that place, and they don't pay rent on that place either. What is the rate of return for the city of Calgary on the Saddle Dome? What is the rate of return on the investment we put in there? I'll tell you what it is. It's zero. If, however, you can make the case that by building infrastructure we'll get the money back, good, let's do it. I'd like to do that. But while we're talking about infrastructure, what we should be doing when we build infrastructure is build that which we need, that which what we want. Build it because we want it, not because the IOC needs it.
Okay, let's talk about security costs. I'm going to put it, one of the things John Furlong said to me is he doesn't even know the accounting on how much security cost, because that was something that was absorbed by the different levels of government who were providing it. And I think in some ways, it's a bit unfair to not assume that there's a certain amount of policing costs that are just built into the fact that providing policing and security is a basic function of municipal government. And the other question would be is, in this dangerous world, you can stop doing everything because you can be making the argument it would be too costly for security. So at some point, there is a cost that governments absorb just to be able to be a vibrant city that attracts tourism and attracts big events. So I'm somewhat persuaded by that argument. And also you've got Rick Hansen, who's probably a guy who knows a thing or two about this, saying we can handle this. So again, he's got the credibility. I'm inclined to trust him on it. Let's go to Tom first, because I'm sure you're going to dismantle this argument too. Go ahead.
Well, the number that people are thinking about right now for the security costs for the Vancouver Olympic Games was around $1 billion. And we had, with a G20 conference here in Calgary a couple of years ago?
I think was it the G8 at
G8?
the Kananaskis?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The security costs for that was around $1 billion. And it doesn't matter what level of government you're talking about, we have only one taxpayer. And we, the taxpayer, are going to pay for it, whether it's the city government pays for it, provincial or municipal. So there's no just saying, well, look, don't worry about that, someone else will look after that. And you're right, we don't know what the cost is going to be today, given today's atmosphere or circumstances internationally. It could be even more than $1 billion. And it's not including the best budget for the Olympic Games. But we have to be prepared to take that into account. Or we can't just say, well, the games are going to go on and be happy ever after. We're all going to be happy ever after. We have to face reality. This is going to cost money. Doesn't matter how you look at it. And their money isn't there right now. And it's not going to be there by 2026 either.
Frank, your thoughts on security costs?
Well, one of the problems here is this. If we're going to have another ice rink, it's going to be paid for by the city. Now, and I would just say, let's just take a new stadium. Edmonton just had one, and it's a beauty, and the community is using it big time, more than we would ever. The facility we have now doesn't have a roof that's big enough to get all this. The people who come through here, so we don't get as many of those visitors you would know, because the ceiling is not as good from the saddle dome. So let's just focus on having a new arena, because of all the things that I just said. This one is nearly 30 years old, and it isn't up to the level of the other ones that are being built, and so we're going to have to build that. I won't for a moment say where are we going to get that money, but I can feel my wallet getting a little bit thinner. If I were to say, I'll come along and I'll get the Olympics to rent that from you for, I'll just make a number up, $10 million. Would you go for it? For the $10 million, they get to use it for 16 days, so they wouldn't expect to pay any more. By the way, these are not realistic numbers necessarily, but just to try to show you what I'm trying to say is, we've got a problem, and I'm not saying that the Olympics will solve the problem, but I am saying that they will not make it worse. And it's a good program anyway. The hotels get a lot of business. Everybody gets more business, and we get a lot of worldwide. People might come to see Calgary a little more when they've seen it in the Olympics. We certainly found that when we had the games there. There was just all kinds of interest in coming to Calgary.
Tom wants to respond to
Danielle,
something you
please,
said.
Mr. King, let's not focus on the arena. let's focus on the Olympics, because this reminds me of the argument in the old days. People started out by talking about getting an NHL team here in Calgary. And people who were behind that knew that the citizens of Calgary would not pay for a new arena. So they're sitting around trying to figure out, how can we get a new arena for a national hockey team? And somebody in the back of the room puts up his hand, bright idea, says, well, let's call it the Olympics, because then we're going to have to build an arena for the Olympics. And this is deja vu all over again, because now we're talking about, well, we need a new arena. Well, what should we do? Let's have the Olympics, then we'll build an arena again for that. That doesn't work for me. Let's forget about focusing on that. Now I got a better idea for you. Here's an idea I'm going to float right now. Forget about the Olympics. Forget about the Olympics and buy the Flames. I was talking about money here, $20 down here. We're talking about how many billions of dollars for the Olympics. Forget about the billions. You can buy the Flames for $300 million. And if they don't want to stay here for that, well, there are a lot of other franchises around you can pick up for that amount of money. $300 million is nothing compared to the billions for the Olympics. Forget about buying the Olympics, just buy the Flames.
And I'll also say that is actually one of the arguments that people make against the Olympics, is they feel like the Olympics is just being pitched to be able to build the arena.
Yeah.
But on the issue of security, because the world has changed since 1988, is there any concerns that you have about security costs?
You big concerns, that's one I do not have an answer for, because you have to have it. And boy, is it ever a lot more expensive than what we paid. And that would be one of the ones that I would be concerned about, and that's where the feds have to come in and help by making that part of their contribution. We need soldiers here. We need all kinds of security that we didn't have. We did have good security, but in today's side of things, I know it's way more than what we had, even escalating it just for cost of money or something. But let me also say this, that what's happening is we're talking about things that can be discussed and disposed of. For example, we've got all kinds of things that work here now. And you're talking to the guy from Vancouver. We did way better than they did. Way better. I mean, they had really big monies that were a lot less. Talk to us. We have done this thing, and if you can do it again under today's circumstances, I think that you'd find that we would not be. First of all, we're not going to solve the money problem that's there. We're not going to contribute to it, is what I'm saying. You don't need to have more money. When we had our games, I'll tell you just a few stories. We came into the Olympic arena just after Montreal left it, and they left it a real mess. You may recall they hadn't paid their money, their fees, and the feds had to do a special, whatever you call it, where they sell tickets and you can win money in order to help pay for
like a lottery?
Yeah, for Montreal. And so what I'm saying is we shouldn't have to look at things outside the games. Do we want to have a new arena? I think we could get a new arena if we paid for it, if we had the Olympic Games. So I don't agree with you that it would be a bad thing. It would be one of the few good things that I can think of, because if we didn't need an arena, then we couldn't say this, but we do need an arena. It's going to be paid for, and suppose we could get $1 million for you against that. That would, and then the other thing is the use of these facilities after the games. We have at COP, we call it, we're doing it 30 years later, and we've got all year long, our children are on the place skiing, and the slides are there, and more has been added, and more has been added. We've got the Hall of Fame out there. These are all things that came because of the Olympics. And you have to be in a business mode and think of some of these things. And it's not that the Olympics are going to solve our debt problems and whatnot here. It's that we're not going to contribute to them. In case anyone thinks I'm saying, oh, just we get the Olympics and all that debt will be gone. I'm not saying that for a minute. What I'm saying is you don't need to spend tens of millions of dollars to have the Olympics here again. And I'm making one other assumption, and that is in the next 5 to 10 years, if we don't have another hockey arena, there's going to be a lot of hell on the street, I would think, because you've seen what
He's not threatening that the team is going to move.
Well, you've seen what they've done in Edmonton, and it's fantastic. They built it, and it's got a community access to it, and I'd like to really do what they did.
Here's a solution for you, Mr. King. The Calgary Flames just renewed their agreement with the Saddle Down Foundation to the year 2033. So they ain't going nowhere. And they're not going anywhere in 5 or 10 years. They're still going to be here 2033. But what you're implying is, and I hope this is right, I think you were saying that we could run the Olympic Games privately almost, or like a private enterprise, and make money doing
No,
it. Well,
not make money.
well, at least break even then.
Well, yes, if you broke even, I think we would be terrific, and you'd have to pay for the use of the facilities too, and this is not everything provided free and so on.
Okay.
So I don't mind that idea at all. A break-even, privately run operation, that's okay.
Well, I think you'd probably get more people on board. Now, if anyone wants to ask a question, you can come up here and we'll get you to speak in the mic. So that, but I do have one more that I need to ask, because this is where I have, maybe it's an ethical issue. I support Olympics. I love the fact that our athletes can compete. I love the own the podium. I feel like we're free riders. If we in a rich country like Canada say, sorry, too expensive for us, Rio, you go ahead and do it. Or China, you go ahead and do it. Or somewhere that is nowhere near as equipped financially to go ahead and do it, then I don't think we should participate in the games. Because if we want to celebrate athleticism, if we believe it's valuable to us to have our athletes participate in this, I do not know how, as a rich country, we can't step up occasionally and do our part. So can you respond to that one?
Yeah, so you're saying we should do the games as a public service for the world then?
Well, I think otherwise, how do you justify
I think there are better things we can do for the world than run the Olympic Games.
Okay, let me then clarify it. Who is in a financial position to host these games then? If we're not, who is?
Calgary is not, and whoever else might be, I don't know. There are a lot of cities that have the opportunity to do this. Boston, for example, just had a referendum on hosting the Olympics there. And I don't know the argument you're just posing now ever came up then. The issue there is the cost to the city. The issue is the cost to us here. We had a lot of money. We did it once in the 88 Olympics. We don't have money today. It's not there. If you want to raise your taxes and pay for them, that's your point of view. But I would suggest to you that the majority of the people in this city would say no to paying for the Olympics, notwithstanding the great memories we have of the 88 Olympics and the excellent experience we had then. We are in a new era. There are so many things that we are concerned about tonight. I was in a meeting last week downtown, sitting there looking out the window. I could see through 3 buildings beside us, and there's nobody in there. We have a 40% occupancy rate, or in downtown, vacancy rate in downtown Calgary right now. And I don't care about the vacancy rate, that doesn't mean anything. But what means something to me is that the people that had jobs in those offices a couple of years ago don't have them anymore. And there is no room for any philosophical discussion about saving the world today, because it just comes down to the 20 bucks here on the floor. We don't got it.
So 2026 is 9 years away. I don't know if I share Tom's gloominess that we're still going to be in this sad a situation as we are today, but can you deal with this issue? Because that's where I'm really torn by it. I think I'm hearing Tom say, hey, we did our part. by hosting this in '88, come back to us another couple hundred years when we've got the money. But I don't feel that there are very many countries in the world, when you combine provincial and federal support, who have the capacity as a Canadian city to be able to do this, especially since we can also use previous infrastructure.
Well, let me just make one thing clear, and it's different than now, but the Olympic Games didn't cost Calgarians anything. We paid for everything, and everything was there. What I'm saying is that it's not that good now, probably. But if you don't, the Olympic Games are going to somewhere every 2 years. Summer, winter, every 2 years. And cities are lined up to get those. Are we worse off than all those other cities that are lined up for these summer and winter games? And yet I want to make it sure that this is not a solution to paying off all our debts that have nothing to do with the Olympic Games. But I can tell you this for sure, the Olympic Games did not leave Calgarians with 1 cent of debt.
All right, so Dr. Gabriel, Bill Gabriel is one of the candidates for mayor. Come on up and so we can make sure that you can be heard.
Can I take this $20?
He's asking if he can take the $20. Someone's gonna get that.
Okay. So actually, first, I'd just like to thank the two gentlemen for presenting their opinions, because by hearing both sides has helped us finally to formulate an intelligent answer. And thank you, Danielle, for moderating. So the question I have is actually 2 parts. First, I would like to ask how much it costs to bid. Like, do we have to pay money when you place a bid? How much do I have to pay? And secondly, if you bid, between the time you bid and they decide, do you have a chance to withdraw? That's the first part of my question.
Why don't you let him answer that and then we'll get
Okay.
There's no charge for making a bid, like you don't pay the IOC money in order to make a bid. But where the cost might be is getting the bid together. Now, when we put this together, we just got a whole bunch of people. We were a member of the Booster Club, and the Booster Club is in charge of trying to get sport things built in the city and whatnot. So that's where this bid came from. And we soon found that there was no real cost to us. One would be you have to go to Edmonton to talk to the premier and so on, but there was no cost to the Booster Club. But then, as soon as we got seriously interested, and that was after we convinced the city that they should do it, and we took the mayor down to see one of the Olympic Games in eastern United States, came back being very much involved and said, gee, this is really a good kind of thing to do, so we're in, we'll be with you. But if the city would only have to have any money, they don't need to give money to the bid committee, but they would need any money that if they wanted to go off and try to sell something or do something, they would have their own, they can have their own, but you don't need to have money to make a bid from
You don't have
the
to
city.
put money. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so
Excuse me, I have to ask, though, we've already paid $5 million for the
Yeah.
bid.
No.
Well, to put the bid together,
Yeah.
so there's money to put,
City
yeah, there's money
Council's
to
already
put the
paid
bid
$5
together.
million.
yeah.
And they're looking at more million to actually prepare the bid.
Correct.
And from what I'm reading now, the bids can be anywhere from $20 to $50 million. That's just to prepare a competitive bid. And now if we're gonna bid for something, it means we're all in it. We are intending to go ahead if we actually get the bid. We're making that. So we're not talking about 50 million, we're talking about the buildings that come after that.
Yeah. No, see, the reason I asked that question is, I understand we have till February to bid, right?
Correct.
So we have an election coming, and you mentioned a couple of important points, that the success is basically based on proper management, and in my opinion, based on my experience, smart negotiation also and collaboration So you might have a mayor has this quality after October, so maybe you have a chance to bid. But my last question is, with your experience, were you part of this committee chosen by the city to make assessment if we can bid or not? Or why you weren't part of this committee?
I had no part in it at all.
Well, that's my last question.
Thanks, Dr. Gabriel.
I had no part in any of the recent doings. Nobody asked me, and I didn't put myself in their face, so I think they got good people there, but
They could
I,
have used you.
They could, I was gonna say that, they
They
could have
could've
used
used
you,
you.
for sure. Anyone else have any comments or questions? Please come on up. You just wouldn't mind stating your name as well, and if you're running for office.
I'm not running for office. My name is Roger Gagne, and I remember the '88 Olympics, and I would be hard pressed to find anyone with bad memories of it. I think it was a big success. But I also remember walking around in a t-shirt on some of those days, and I can remember the struggle there was to keep snow on the ski hill. And that was in 1988, and since then, the pine bark beetle has devastated forests in BC and has crossed over into Alberta, and glaciers worldwide are melting, and the oceans in the Gulf of Mexico are 2 to 7 degrees warmer Fahrenheit, so they're fueling stronger hurricanes. And where in the world, regardless of how much money they have, where in the world can you predict that they'll have seasonably cold temperatures in winter to host Winter Olympics?
That's a good question.
I have nobody that I know that I could phone that would ever change the Olympic, what do you call it? The weather. Those are things that come and go. But what you're saying is the whole world is in trouble for Winter Games.
Well, can you
Because it could happen anywhere else in the world too, and I don't know of anybody that is sort of saying that we shouldn't have Winter Games anymore.
Can you comment though on how much of a problem it was to manage through the fact that the weather didn't cooperate?
What, for the games?
From 88,
For our games?
yeah, did it cost lots of money? Did it ruin any events? Did it, just remind us of it?
No, we, the strange thing was it stopped snowing and blowing and whatnot just about a day before the games. The games went under perfect weather. There was no extra cost from the weather at all during the games. The one, and I wouldn't be that worried about the weather. We can't do anything about it. The whole world is in the same position. And if that's the case, there should be no more games because the whole world is subject to these kind of things. So don't let the fact that we've had one of these things come and blow us away or something like that. There are lots of things that could happen. We could have an earthquake here too, and should we have no games because of the earthquakes? No, come on. The weather will not do something so bad that these games would go down. If there was something really bad, they might be postponed or something like that, but you can't solve all the problems of the world with this. It's not that good. But there's people all around the world that are having a look at this and standing up to do it, and they must have weather problems, I'm sure, too. So,
It sounds like, from Mr. King's perspective, that this is a long-term investment. It's not just a one-off that gets evaluated on a 2-year window. In the 2.8 billion, there's probably, $600 or $800 million that are probably used long-term and can be generating money and also generating well-being for our citizens. And I just was wondering if you could touch on those points. And I think we did have someone in the audience that was running and asked to run a referendum for the Olympics on behalf of the city. And I guess why hasn't that materialized either, and why did that just die? I think no one really knew about that on a massive level either. Because I know I was in '88 and we benefited. I benefited, I use those facilities. My kids now use those facilities, and we were 600,000 people then, we're 1.2 million people now, and we're probably short facilities, and if we're on debt to build Crow Trail, why do we need to do that if it's such doom and gloom too, you know? So, if you could comment on a few of those things, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
Well, I'll start because the economists are known for doom and gloom. I'm a very simple guy, and I think very simply. We have to pay money for what we're going to do. Daniel added up some numbers for us. I think she came to $18 billion. We don't have that money. And as much as it sounds good that we should take this and build infrastructure and facilities that we'll all enjoy today and our children will enjoy tomorrow, the bottom line is we go ahead and do it that way, those children tomorrow will be paying for the enjoyment we had today. We don't have the money. I'd love to have these things. I'd love to say that we develop these facilities or infrastructure or whatever. But if we're going to build infrastructure, let's build it because we need it. Let's build it because we want it. Let's not build it because we have to do it for the International Olympic Committee.
All right, did you want to?
I couldn't agree more. We're not doing this for the International Olympic Committee. We're doing it for ourselves, and I don't know if I ever left any other, and if you're lucky, you can get them to help us. It's not us sending money to them. The only thing they do charge is a portion of the television rights, and we told them how and helped them get more there, but they haven't given us any larger part of that. But that is one of the things that is very big. This is a big television item. Everybody knows that that's what you can get. And they naturally, we gave them 1/3 of our television rights, and I think they're taking 2/3 now. That's the only thing that I've heard that would, I was mad, like who let them get that much? But
That
that's...
could be part of the negotiation though too. Is there any facility that was built that was mothballed afterwards? I know our ski jump is now not long enough, but I think it was used for a number of years after. But we don't have any disasters like Montreal, where the only use they've seen of one of their stadiums is now to house people coming in illegally across the border, do we? Like, we don't have anything that ended up in that
and
situation.
that's what I was talking about, and not wanting to be compared to Vancouver, because they did a whole bunch of things that I was trying. I sat on their board for a while, or at least I communicated with them until we had won the bid. But we didn't use the society very much, except the university. And I think I mentioned already, they shut down the university for 2 weeks so that we could get into their residences and all the other things. And we built an oval, a nice oval there where the speed skating was taking place. And so we didn't pay them anything for shutting down, but we gave them this $4 or $5 million facility. And it took us a year to convince them to shut the university down. They said, we just don't see that we could do that. When they did it, they were very, very pleased that they did it. I mean, the university was exposed to all kinds of foreign people, and there were chances to talk with, and we had university people helping us. So we were very careful not to spend money. We were trying to, if I was giving you a gift, I would like to at least have a thank you for it, and that would be, your people could be there to show them around the university and to make sure everything was okay. There was a dance every night in the university hall. I like the guys in Vancouver very much. I know them very well, and I helped them as much as I could, but they went the other way. They built everything new, and they didn't make as much money on the bottom line as we did. Let me also say that it's called the university, the slides and everything out there are named after Canada. It's Canada Olympic Park is what it's called. And the federal government put up big money to finance everything, and we're involved with the soldiers as well. I sent all the money back to them within a few weeks after the games, and so anything that was with us, they sent a message. The Prime Minister sent me a message about 2 months after the games, and he said, "We've recovered all the money that we put into the Olympic Games in Calgary." So now it's only one time, and maybe we can't do that again, but you have to be where I was in order to understand that these things are really liked and wanted by the feds. And I'll give you another story, if you don't mind. One of the people who bid the third time for Calgary, which lost, was a fellow called Peter Lougheed. And he was sort of in my position of that bid. And he was very helpful about how to avoid these kinds of things. And so I think if you don't have people at the top who are happy to have these games and making them happen, they'll always be worried. Well, by the way, the federal guys had all their money back within 2 months. Did I say that already? Yeah. So these are the kinds of things. People say, well, where do you get the money to do this? And you do need all levels of government to become involved. It's not the city. The city should be way down on the list. And I did have some difficulties. We changed our mayor partway through it, and I took the new mayor through all the Olympics people overseas and so on. But we had to meet every week because what was happening is the media had a special shoulder of the mayor, and they were putting out secret things that we were doing there, and the only way that they could have got it is from the mayor. And so we had a meeting and saying, one of us will have to get out of here. It's either me or you. and he said, oh, don't be so. And I said, well, okay, then we're going to meet every week. And anything that gets sent to the media that is not ready for the media, because he was getting special privileges from one media, and the other guys were saying, hey, how come you don't tell us that? And I say, I don't tell people anything from our board meetings until they're all done. But he was giving them progress. So these kind of things were there, and we need to manage them at all times. And I think, looking back, the city has now benefited greatly from this. Whoops. Was that you that did that?
No, it was Danielle.
I don't think it was me.
Anyway, I'll stop moaning here, but when you've been there and seen such detail behind the scenes, you have started to say, well, we've got all this debt. Well, the games are not going to solve the debt. If anyone thinks they're going to solve the debt, you would think maybe that you're going to have more debt because of this, and that would be, if I were involved and you were involved on the other side, we would sit down and say, this is how we will stop there from ever being a debt that is not already, like, there may be a cost to something that we're going to build and keep. I would go to Edmonton and find out the deal they made with the government to build their new hockey rink and a fabulous place. Maybe we can even get the same kind of cost level that they had.
Let me, if we all know by 2026 we're going to have a conservative federal government and a provincial conservative government. Both of them are going to be in surplus, kicking in. Plus, I would say, I bet part of the reason Ralph Klein became premier was the reputation he built province-wide internationally because of the Olympics. Olympics. So if you want another Calgary mayor becoming premier, then maybe this is the track to be able to get there as well. Let me, Frank, you had a very long time to make your summary remarks. Let me give Tom a chance to respond to anything you may have said, do some rapid remarks, and then we can, if anybody has, then we'll do the vote. We'll see who ended up winning this debate.
Danielle, thank you very much, and I'll make my summary remark right now. The 1988 Olympics were a triumph for the city and the people of the city. And credit is mostly due to the gentleman beside me. And I can say thank you a million times for that. And the legacy is amazing. I can't think of anyone in my knowledge, in my experience, who has done as much for a city and a country as you have. So good job and thank you very much. Thank you. Now, I'm going to go forward, however, to 2026, and it's a new era. And I would like to have you running this new Olympic bid rather than staying in the background and not taking part of it. Because the city council today has a report on its table that it says that it will cost the city of Calgary $2.4 billion. That's what they're looking at, $2.4 billion. That's what we are looking at, $2.4 billion. Now, if you were involved, you would go and say that, look, we can do this. So the city of Calgary doesn't have to pay anything. Well, that is the Calgary share. $2.4 billion is Calgary's share. And there are assumptions in that report that says we'll get money from federal, provincial government, and the TV people. And after we do get that, we still have to pay $2.4 billion. This is not 1988, it's 2026 we're talking about. We're talking about not a clean slate, we're talking about $2.4 billion. And I don't believe, in fact, what I should say is I believe that there are better ways to spend $2.4 billion than trying to replicate the success we had in 1998.
All right, so one last brief comment.
Well, I would like to know, I'd like to see what the $2.6 million net, like, I mean, there is Olympic money that comes in through the door by selling tickets and all those good things. Did they put that money on the table
They
as
did,
part
yeah.
of it?
Yeah,
Well,
because it was initially, I think, 4.1 or 4.2.
4.6.
4.6, and then the offset of the revenue takes us down to still a shortfall of 2.4, but that includes security, capital, and operating.
It does not include security.
It should.
Of course it should, but it does not.
Alrighty, so now referendum time. So
Okay.
2026 Olympics, yes, we should go for it.
Quick question,
Yes.
how much of that 2.8 billion or 2.6 billion, or the number seems to change every day because of any different analysis that one could pull in the model, is actually for legacy assets that one would see in this city for 30 years?
They have said 400 million will be the shortfall on operating, which would mean the balance, call it 2 billion would be on the capital side.
So there'd be $2 billion worth of facilities that would be used for 30 years, not probably one.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay,
Could I ask the question also, how many of those facilities are going to be built whether we have the Olympics or not? You can't charge it to the Olympics if it's going to be here anyway. Just do it, and then we'll rent it from you for 2 weeks, and that's what we did with the city. You don't say we can rebuild this city.
I feel like I have to turn off the mics at some point. I feel like
Okay,
the role of
everybody,
Mr.
go home
Speaker.
and
Okay,
have
we gotta
a
make a
night.
decision at some point here. So, those in favor of the 2026 Olympics? Those opposed to the 2026 Olympics? Is that a tie? I think some people didn't vote. Did you vote twice? Back there, let's try this again. Those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You are voting. Okay. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
I didn't vote for reason.
You're the tiebreaker, Mr. Future Mayor.
easy.
That's how it works.
Because I have a different solution, but it's not the time to discuss it, so.
Well, you know what? I think this reflects where Calgarians are at. Very split over the decision.
Yeah.
Can see the incredible potential benefit and the legacy, but also very concerned about the costs and where we find ourselves right now financially. And thank you so much.
Just a
for-
quick question as
Yes.
well. Frank, how much easier is are the Olympic representatives, how much easier are they to manage than they would have been 30 or 35 years ago? But when the time comes, because they're tougher, they want more, they're going to negotiate harder. Is getting a good deal for Calgary much more difficult now than when you did it? Because I think you brought fresh ideas and an angle and an approach that they appreciated, and also they probably didn't have the experience to ultimately kind of be able to fight you on. Today it's a different animal. How do you feel about the representatives of the committee? Are they honest people? Are they good people? Are they trustworthy? Will they negotiate in good faith?
Well, I do talk to some of the people. One of our lawyer during our games later became president of the Canadian Olympic Association, which is the highest level of the Olympics in Canada. And so he's quite good on this. He was quite concerned that they were having people sitting and taking $5 million just to come to an answer that we took by having zero. So that's, I can't answer exactly how bad it's going to be because I don't know now the people overseas who are running. I know that we helped them get where they are, and that's the only thing I could say, and I don't think that they'll give us a break or anything like that. But I think that they would have to negotiate on a reasonable basis, knowing that we have had the Olympics once before, and we left behind a big trail of success from them. Unfortunately, our good friend is no longer with us. He's gone, but if he were there, I would be over there right now talking to him.
All right, and that's a wrap. Thanks, everybody, for coming out tonight.
Thank you all.
Harold, I think you just have to hold it for one.